listeners. Welcome to this podcast series from ALPHABETA. Do you wonder who decides or what decides the price of a stock or a bond or gold or any other asset class for that matter? Do you ask yourself if you should buy now or sell now? And is the market going to crash or is it poised for a rebound? Don't worry, you're not alone in these type of predicaments. A lot of people, whether they are professional traders or whether they are new entrants into the market, have the same kind of questions. My name is Sundar Nagarajan, and I, along with my colleague Sathya, will help you with the thought process to kind of take you through questions like these. We have both been at this for quite a long time, and we've seen some ups and some downs, and we've got the scars to prove it. And we hope to share some of those learnings with you through this podcast. Hi, Sathya.
Hi, Sundar. Hello, listeners. Just like what Sundar mentioned, we will be picking up each of this topic in this podcast series and analyzing it from different viewpoints. Sundar is a technical analyst and a macro guy, and I'm a pure micro fundamentalist. And hopefully you make some benefits out of this. And by the way, we're going to call this podcast series as Vital Signs.
There's a very good reason for that, Sathya. Just as a person's health depends on a few vital parameters, the health of companies, markets, and even businesses can be measured through a few vital signs. So what we hope to do in this podcast series is to remove the noise and the jargon and the complexity that accompanies most of these conversations and make it interesting for you all.
It makes a lot of sense, Sundar. I am very kicked up and to conduct this series with you. Hello, listeners. Just a disclaimer, like any other show, please note the views expressed here is our individual opinions. It is not meant to provide you any investment recommendations.
In today's episode, we will talk about one specific stock, which is, Vodafone Idea. Now, this stock has been in the news for all the wrong reasons over the last number of years. And let us see what exactly has happened over these few years, in terms of the price action of the stock and the industry happenings around the same time. I want to kind of give a quick overview in terms of what has happened to the telecom sector over the past few years. So if we kind of look at a calendar timeline, September 2016 was when all the drama started in the telecom sector. So Reliance Jio actually started commercial operations in September 2016. And in February 2017, Bharti Airtel took over Telenor India, which was one of the smaller players in the segment. And Bharti Airtel also in October 2017, they started acquisition of Tata Teleservices, which was again, in terms of the market size, they were a fairly small player. So if you recall, at that time, there were a number of players in this telecom market providing services, mobile services, etc., to various, to all the retail users. And in December 2017, Reliance Communications, which was the Anil Ambani group, actually shuts down their 2G and 3G services. March 2018, Aircel Cellular filed for bankruptcy in NCLT because of a lot of debt which they had accumulated. They could not service that debt. And in August 2018, Vodafone merged with Idea, which was another smaller player. And this new entity called Vodafone Idea became the largest telecom subscriber in India by subscribers and revenue. Now, we've quickly looked at a snapshot of what happened in the industry during that time frame. Now, let us look at the specific of what happened to Vodafone Idea as a company, during this timeline. So, as you can see, during this period from 2016 to about 2018-19, the whole sector was in a state of big flux, right? With the Reliance Jio trying to capture large market share and everyone trying to compete with them on price points, the smaller players trying to organize themselves by consolidating with each other and so on. So the number of things were happening, and all in all, it was not very good for the telecom sector as a whole. So Sathya, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and if you go and look back, what happened to Vodafone Idea for that matter, and 2016 was a tipping point for them. From 2016 to 2020 was a tipping point for them. Correct. And it had complete degrowth on their profit. And they had a huge loss accumulating in the books, and which is corroborate with what you have been talking about as the timeline of this telecom industry.
So let me come back to the point that you mentioned, right? Interestingly, before Reliance Jio entry, right, in 2016, the combined market share of Vodafone and Idea was about close to about 37%. And all the smaller players had kind of 8%, 5%, 6%, and so on, right? And Bharti was the largest player with 25% individual market share. And Reliance Jio was nowhere in the picture, right, if you recall those days. Now, suddenly they come in and they start making a big splash with huge price cuts. And, that really upset the apple cart for the telecom sector as a whole.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, that's very true, because especially in industry where switching cost is very low,
right,
and that the barrier to switch from one provider to another provider, which is very true in a telecom industry, and it's very easy for a new competitor to come and cut the price and get the larger market share, because it does not cost anything for a customer.
Correct.
Customer stands to gain in terms of switching the...
And in fact, if you recall at that point in time, I think the telecom department also announced that there could be portability of numbers.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And they said if you move from one operator to another, you can still carry the same number with you.
Yeah.
And that actually alludes to what you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So I mentioned the market share of each of these participants, before Reliance Jio entry. Now, after Reliance Jio entry, as of July 2020, Reliance Jio has a market share of 35%. Right? And Bharti Airtel has remained around the same level of 27%. 25% they've just increased marginally. And Vodafone Idea has now dropped to 26%. And the other player, BSNL, is quite insignificant, as you probably know. So there has been a huge shift in terms of the market share of each of these telecom of these players in the telecom industry, and Reliance Jio has significantly captured a large part of the market share. And Sathya, you may want to add here as to what you think about this, but I'm going to see how this correlates with the share price of Vodafone Idea over this period of time. From 2016 onwards.
Yeah.
So,
why don't we look at the price chart and come back?
Okay.
Come back and look at it.
Right. So, around 2016, the stock price of Vodafone Idea was close to about 85 rupees. That was the stock price of Vodafone Idea. Now, since that time, that kind of coincided with the Reliance Jio entry and their aggressive pricing tactics, the stock price slowly started sliding. And over the next 2 years, it came down to about 50 rupees, 40 rupees, 30 rupees. And it hit a low in early part of 2020 at about 2.5 rupees a share, 2.75 rupees a share. Right? Currently, it's trading at about 8 rupees 70 paisa.
Okay. So, Sundar, do you think, as an observer, as an outside observer, do you think it is the price chart indicates that it has already hit the bottom and in the recovery path? Yeah.
So, to address that, I'm going to look at, as you know, Sathya, you're going to be talking, there are two ways to look at companies, right? One is through a fundamental approach where you look at the financial parameters of a company. The other way is to look at it through a price action. Right. So I'm going to kind of look at the price action first. As I mentioned to you, this being the slide of the price of Vodafone Idea. And I'm going to kind of compare two important technical indicators at this point and, kind of come to, my conclusion in terms of where I think the stock is headed.
Okay.
Right? And then you can weigh in with your, fundamental approach. Right. So I'm going to be looking at one of the important technical parameters, which is called as the Fibonacci retracement curve. For those of our viewers who are familiar with technicals, the Fibonacci is a very popularly used retracement curve to identify points where one can enter or exit a stock, based on resistance levels and so on. So based on this Fibonacci retracement curve, which has been plotted right from around the 75-80 levels to current prices, we see that the stock has made a bottom at 2.55 sometime in the early part of 2020. It's now at about 8.45. The 23.6 retracement level is at about 20 rupees, and it is slowly trying to head there. It is consolidating very heavily in this region. And as people who have been familiar with technical analysis would know, consolidation is a very good sign of a stock that is waiting to take off. Right?
Okay.
So it can either break down or take off. But in this case, I'm going to give a benefit of doubt to Vodafone Idea that it is going to take off because it's already probably seen the worst of its times, behind it. Right? The other aspect of technical analysis and that I'm going to see is the moving averages. So there are two important moving averages that technical analysts normally use. One is the 200-day moving average, which is a very long-term moving average. And another is a fairly medium-term to short-term moving average, which is the 50-day moving average. Now, in the case of Vodafone Idea, the 200-day moving average has been very well maintained. The 200-day moving average, as we speak, is at about 5.29, 5.4. Let us assume it's 5.4. The stock price is well above that, which is a very bullish sign. On top of that, the 50-day moving average has moved above the 200-day moving average, which is typically called as a golden crossover in technical terms. So whenever a stock encounters a golden crossover, wherein the shorter term moving average of 50-day moves above the 200-day moving average, it's a very, very bullish sign for the market. And in this case, the stock is slightly below the 50-day moving average, but the golden crossover has already occurred sometime around June of this year. Right?
Okay, that's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. So if you look at these two important technical parameters, both the Fibonacci from a recovery standpoint and from a momentum standpoint, the moving averages, the golden crossover, I think the Vodafone Idea stock is in for a good up run. But then we definitely have to consider other fundamental factors. So Sathya, I'm going to leave it to you to assess that part of it.
Sure. So while Sundar has set the tone very nicely in terms of the technical aspects of Vodafone Idea, what, as an investor, as a very rational investor, as a fundamental investor, I'm very bothered about what is the fundamentals of these companies are. So while we look at the fundamental aspects, there are two where people talk about, learned investors, analysts talk about too many things in fundamental analysis. For make it very easy for all our listeners, broadly I would look into two aspects. One, whether the firm is consistently making profit or earnings. And the second factor one has to consider is that what are the forces or factors which can disturb these earnings or profits of these companies are, right? So if you go and look back, the earnings of Vodafone Idea, and let's say the company I was looking at for the last 10 years, starting from 2010 to 2020, and like what Sundar was alluding in terms of what was happening in telecom industry, pre-Jio era, post-Jio era. So till pre-Jio era, 2016, I would say, there was a consistent earnings of Vodafone Idea. So post-Jio entry from 2016, if you look at the converse happened to Vodafone Idea.
And why do you think this happened, Sathya?
The very factor you talked about, Sundar, is in terms of price cut, where the industry is a very commoditized industry,
right,
where the switchover is very easy for customer to move from one service to another provider.
Right.
So there was a gradual decline of customer base, this gradual decline of revenue base, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And this has resulted, which is in the bottom line of Vodafone Idea, and there was a continuous downward spiral for Vodafone Idea. It started making losses from 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Losses got accumulated. And now the big question of whether the company can even run today.
In fact, if you recall, about a year ago, or just very recently, I think the Idea Group refused to put more capital inside Vodafone Idea, right?
Absolutely.
At one point, they said, we are not willing to invest anymore in this company, and we don't want to take any more risk, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead. I just thought I'll point that out.
Now that's very true, because the owner themselves are not very comfortable way of running the business, which is the Idea, the Vodafone UK business, where our Aditya Birla groups are. So while this factor, which is number one factor of analyzing the fundamentals, which is the whether the firm is making consistent profit, consistent earnings. So this completely negates me about Vodafone as an investment from a fundamental aspects. The second aspect I would look into is that what people talk about is what forces which determines the profitability of the companies are. So we have borrowed from what Michael Porter, the Harvard professors and business strategies. He broadly talks about 5 forces which determines the profitability of a company. The forces of threat of new entrants coming in, taking over the market. Threat of substitutes, for example, I can give a classic example. Today, what is a substitute of an online market vis-a-vis the brick and store markets? Right. So what kind of threat of substitutes? Is there a threat of substitutes to the markets, sir? The third factor is about the bargaining power of customers. And the fourth factor is the bargaining power of the suppliers. And the fifth factor, which is rivalry among existing competitions, sir. While Michael Porter talks about these 5 forces, when I go look back this particular industry and I want India as a market, I would want to add upon to this particular 2 additional factors, which is the regulations, which determines the driving this particular industry, sir.
Absolutely.
And the third, the seventh factor I would call about is the source of funding. How does a firm really runs? What kind of capital the firm runs?
Right.
And what is the source of funding of this company, sir? Right. So if you look at this broadly, these 7 factors and what is determined, we go look back the study of from 2016, what is deteriorated in Vodafone Idea, broadly we can conclude on 3 factors, right? One in about the rivalry among competitions and what kind of price wars have reduced the players. The second factor about regulations, I'll talk about regulations in a moment.
I think that's very, very important. I think the regulation aspect has played a huge role because I think, in my view, I thought the government involvement or interference in the sector, right, has been very huge, right, from the spectrum auction to the scams that happened during that era and so on and so forth. A lot of very, very conflicting signals, right?
That's very true. That's very true. And in fact, that's where while India is making a lot of strides on making ease of doing business,
right,
but today the kind of archaic regulations make it very vulnerable for any industry to operators to operate, right? So if you look back and talking the first point about rivalry among competitions, while you broadly alluded towards the consolidations and people going out of business, let's do a little bit backtrack. And if you see the scene of telecom operators, the pre-Jio entry in 2015, there were 10 players. Names like Aircel, Telenor, your Reliance Communications, or Tata Telecom, Tata Docomo, right? So there are 10 players, including some of these names I've mentioned. Now, if you go fast track it and come back as of today, we have only 4 players, like be it Reliance Jio, then your Airtel, then Vodafone Idea, which is the topic of discussion today, and still the government entity which is still hanging there, BSNL. So what has happened to the remaining players? So the price war among the competitions has really moved away or made people not to continue this business become unviable, and they closed the shop and moved on and made only these 4 people to sustain here. Right. And while what has happened post Jio entry, if you look at it, and the Vodafone Idea or where Airtel have really talked about is that post Jio entry, the total revenue, the pie available, the total revenue share available to all the players has really come down. Right,
and that is probably because the average revenue per user has come down, right? Yeah. Because what we as an average as an individual player as an individual, right, pay for our monthly subscription, that cost has drastically come down over the last number of years.
That's
and
true.
We are getting much more bandwidth, much more capability for the same cost that we pay.
Very true,
right?
And in fact, very true. And if you look at and we take the example of ARP, what people talk about in telecom industry, average revenue per user. And it has, for Vodafone Idea itself, the average revenue per user has really come down by 33% from 2016 to 2020.
And on top of that, I think the number of users also drastically dropped.
Exactly.
I mean, they lost a lot of users to Reliance.
So it was a double whammy effect for Vodafone Idea.
Correct.
One side, they're losing the customers to people, like because of number portability becoming easier.
Right.
It's a commoditized market. Right. Very easy to customers to switch. The second side is about the price war, which is again putting them very impact on their bottom line, sir. Right. And in fact, very interesting. I will just this thing in terms of what Sunil Mittal from Aircel was telling. It was that it is completely unsustainable for operators to continue in this environment. And he says that the kind of tariff we charge to the customer doesn't even recover his cost of capital, right? So as a fundamental investor, it gives me a clear doubt for me. What is the future of Vodafone Idea? So while at this point there is a war, price war is currently happening, and people is continuously reducing the market pie, and there is while Vodafone and every marketplace are trying to beef up the prices, but it gives me a big question whether the firm can sustain, can it grow, can it continue to contribute towards the profitability of the companies, right?
Can I kind of counter you on that, Sathya?
Sure.
Because what I think is today we've reached a stage where whatever consolidation had to happen in industry has already happened. right? I don't think there is any. Basically, as you pointed out, there are only 4 players, and I think BSNL is a very marginal player. They don't really count for anything because nobody prefers their services. So the main competition is between Jio, Airtel, and Vodafone Idea. Recently, if you saw, Vodafone themselves have committed to the Vodafone Idea by pumping in more equity capital. They have rebranded themselves as VI. Right, I can actually see it when I go on the road. I can see their showrooms being spruced up and so on and so forth. And more importantly, we should remember that Vodafone is a very powerful telecom operator in Europe, and the other player in Idea is backed by the Birlas, which is a very prominent, big business family in India, right? So looking at the quality of the promoters and looking at the state of where the telecom sector is in now, I think this whole sector is poised for a turnaround. And in fact, both the competition of Reliance Jio, such as Airtel and even Vodafone Idea, and as well as looking at some of the technical parameters that we discussed, I definitely think it's on its way up, and I'm willing to put my money on it. So as of today, I'm going to invest 10,000 shares in Vodafone Idea at a price of ₹8.50. So if you want to take up on the challenge, Satya, you're free to do
Okay, sure. So then let me complete. Okay, you're already moved into your challenge and started your investments.
Yeah.
But let me complete. I've not given you the complete story of Vodafone Idea.
Right.
The 2 other factors, right, in terms of the regulations, what is very disturbing to me is about the AGR regulations, the adjusted gross revenue regulations, and the Supreme Court ruling. And there is an exchequer which is demanding to Vodafone Idea close to 60,000 crores, which is the payable in over a 10-year period.
Did the international tribunal come in favor of Vodafone?
That's for the Hutchinson merger. It has nothing to do with the AGR.
Okay.
So the AGR, Vodafone, it will still be a liability. Liability has to be paid, and the players are not arguing against Supreme Court judgment, and they're going ahead with Supreme Court judgment, and Supreme Court given them the leeway in terms of paying it over a 10 equal installment over a 10-year period.
Right.
So there is a bottom line impact for Vodafone Idea, close to 60,000 crores or 70,000 crores. The number comes very differently. So there is a bottom line impact which Vodafone Idea has to pay over a 10-year period. That's the second aspect. The third aspect, which is completely disturbing me and which can bring down a company anytime, is about their leverage, right, in terms of the debt-equity ratios. What is the amount of borrowing the company has done in terms of sustaining its business, right? Today, if you look at Vodafone Idea, the latest September 2020 results, the net worth of the firm is negative. So what does this net worth negative means? So God forbid, if the firm goes into liquidations or file for a bankruptcy and goes ahead and sells off all the assets, and the money they realize from selling those assets are not sufficient to pay back to the lenders of the companies are. Leave alone what money will be left to equity shareholders like you and me if you're going to buy, if you're a holder of Vodafone Idea. So which gives me a complete doubt in terms of what is the long-term sustainability of this particular company, sir.
Okay.
And whether the company can go as a going concern.
Okay. One opportunity that I think we have to keep in mind for the telecom sector as a whole, including Vodafone Idea, is the 5G opportunity. Right? Once that comes in, I think that will be a huge kicker in terms of revenues for all the telecom companies. And I think the latest trend in terms of what you're seeing by way of investments even into Reliance Jio, the big US players coming in such as Amazon and, the pension funds and, other government-owned funds and huge funds are coming into Reliance Jio. I think a similar thing may happen to Vodafone Idea. I mean, see, the point about technical analysis and trying to predict stock prices early is that once the investment comes in, once the balance sheet is cleaned up, you no longer have an opportunity to invest, right? So I think it makes sense from my point of view to be contrarian and, take a bet at this point in time. Because looking at it from a technical point of view also, if I look at the Fibonacci retracement levels, my stop loss is hardly 2 to 3 rupees away from my current purchase price. So I'm willing to live with that loss. So as long as I'm willing to live with that loss, I'm willing to invest at this particular price. And let us see over the next 6 months to 1 year how my 10,000 shares does.
Very good, very good. Thank you. I wish you luck, Sundar.
Thank you very much.
So while Sundar was very bullish about Vodafone Idea, given the Fibonacci retracement or the technical aspects, so if I, as a fundamental investor, I'm ready to make a bet, provided I get a clear signals whether the company can go as a going concern and there's a clear plan in terms of how they're going to retire the borrowings and pump in the equity capital, sir. In September 2020, there was a board meeting, and the firm said the clear plan of rising equity over 25,000 crores. Maybe it's a good positive sign.
Right.
I would wait for how it spanned out into before I make my plunge. Because I'm okay to wait and get the signals of going concern, and before I jump into the market.
Okay.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in today. In this podcast, Sundar and I made the case for Vodafone Idea. While Sundar is very bullish, and he looked at the vital signs of the technical charts and the price movement of Vodafone Idea and the Fibonacci retracement of Vodafone Idea. And I looked at the fundamental issues of Vodafone in terms of whether the company can be a going concern, in terms of the borrowings, the heavy leverage in the borrowing the company has. I'm still very cautious. I want to wait and watch how the stock turn up to. What are you going to do? We love to hear from you. Please write to us, post your suggestions or comments or feedback, either in the comment section below, or write to us in help@alphabeta.io. We have a lot of interesting topics lined up. If you like the show, subscribe to the show. You can also follow us and keep yourself updated in our social media channels. Thank you.